Welcome, everybody. This is Postman, an introduction for developers. This is the very first episode of our Postman Space Camp series. And again, if you're not familiar, that's fine. This is a brand new thing that we're launching, and it's going to be a series of webinars that are more specialized to specific audiences. So this one's for developers. We'll talk a bit more about upcoming episodes, but we have one for API ops folks, DevOps, and so forth. So welcome to this one. We're excited to have you, and thanks for joining. So let's go ahead and do a quick introduction. I'm Sean Keegan. I'm a developer advocate with Postman. I am in New York City, and I've been with Postman about 9 months now. So Claire, go for it.
Thanks, Sean. I'm Claire Froelich, and I am a student community manager here at Postman. Developer may not be in my title, but it is in my blood. So before joining Postman, I was a developer and using Postman a lot. So I'm really excited to share with you some tips on how it can make your development life much smoother and faster.
Awesome. Cool. So we'll go through the agenda real quick. So before we do anything, again, the target audience for this webinar is developers that are new to Postman. So we do want to talk briefly about what Postman is. Then we'll go through some of the getting started info, do a quick walkthrough of various parts of Postman. And then we'll finish up by just sharing some resources for people to continue their learning, continue diving in on Postman and see all the things that you can do. And then that last piece is going to be the Q&A session. So that'll be around 15 minutes of live Q&A. Claire and I will be going through the questions that have popped up throughout the session. And we'll do our best to kind of answer live. And so one note about that, again, if you're just hopping on, we do have the Q&A section of the Zoom. And so that's where, if you have a question about things that weren't clear, things you want us to dive deeper on, enter them in that Q&A section. That's going to be different than the chat. The chat will be, say hello, say where you're from. But if you have specific questions that you'd like answered, go ahead and make sure you do that in the Q&A section. Cool. Claire, let's talk about what Postman is. So just in general, if I were to summarize it in a sentence or two, this description on the left kind of does a nice job of that. So Postman is an API collaboration platform used by more than 15 million users. And when I think about how to describe this to my mom or somebody that really doesn't know much about tech stuff, I just say it helps people work more efficiently with APIs. So that's kind of a very bare bones description. So Claire, can you maybe help fill in some gaps on or dive a bit deeper on what Postman is and how other folks are using it?
Sure. Yeah, I've been looking at the chat and I see there's some people that have just heard of Postman yesterday, some that are wanting to learn about Postman because their team uses it. The thing about Postman is it's going to help you at all stages of the API development lifecycle. So from designing your API to starting to build out mocks so you can test your API, writing tests for your API, and of course the classic, clicking around, exploring what types of responses come back for various requests. So it really gives you like a command center for all things API. And we'll be going over especially the request and response features today.
That was a great description, Claire. I haven't heard that yet, a little command center. But yeah, so again, this session rather is kind of devoted to helping developers learn about Postman. So that is going to be our focus. And we'll touch on some of these things that you see in this graphic here. Alrighty. So learning objectives. So we're going into this assuming that folks are potentially new to Postman. And like Claire said, we see some folks in the chat that are new to Postman. So we kind of want to give you the background of how to use it and get into some more advanced use cases if you're a developer. So we kind of talked a bit about what Postman is, what it's used for. We'll send a request in Postman using CRUD operations. We'll inspect the response, so see what we get back, be able to test it, saving examples to a collection, getting and setting variables. Again, this is something that we're assuming if you're coming to this webinar from a development background, probably familiar with something like variables, and we'll talk about kind of how to use them in Postman, what the benefits are, and so forth. Basic authorization, I think the bane of all API users' existence. So we'll talk about how Postman kind of helps with that and makes it a bit easier. And then we'll get into some of the built-in ways you can debug and troubleshoot some unexpected behavior in Postman. So pretty excited stuff. These slides will be available to you later. So if you wanted to look at this, we will have these slides available for download. The video will be on demand. So this is all possible later. All right. So I think that's enough talking from myself. Claire is going to take over here and kind of give us a bit of a walkthrough on how to go about this workspace. So we have a public workspace, and we'll talk about what that means. And if you want to find it, Claire is going to kind of walk us through this process of going to the Postman Space Camp workspace. So I'm going to stop sharing here and let Claire take over. And yeah.
Thanks, Sean. Before I share my screen, I'm going to share in the chat a link to the Postman web browser application. So if you click the Postman Explorer here in the chat, you'll be able to access Postman from the web browser. This is assuming that you've already created a Postman account. If you have not, you can take a moment to make one real quickly. But this is only if you want to follow along with us today. If you just want to watch the Zoom, that's totally fine as well. Again, this is recorded, so you'll be able to watch it again later and click that pause button to do it at your own pace if you'd like. But check out the chat for the link. That will take you to Postman. I will share my screen and we will get started. Hey, Sean, can you give me a verbal thumbs up if you can see my screen right now?
Yeah, we're good, Claire.
Okay. Great. So I'm at the Postman Space Camp workspace right now. The first thing you need to know about Postman, when you're in here, there's this search bar at the top where you can navigate to any workspace or collection in the Postman network. So if you want to come join me at the Postman Space Camp, all you have to do is search for Postman Space Camp. And it's going to come up with a list of search results. And actually, oops, let's try that again. Postman Space Camp. All right, so here's the search results. You'll see the first one up here with the little globe icon is our public workspace for Postman Space Camp. So go ahead and click that. And it will teleport us to our workspace, which is, as you could guess, a space for working. To give an anatomy of this UI, over on the left side, you have your navigation. So you've got collections, all APIs, environments. We're going to be spending a lot of time in the collections tab today. You may be wondering, okay, what's a collection? Well, remember, Postman is a tool for helping us make and organize requests to APIs. And we can group our requests in something called a collection. So in this panel, in the next panel to the right is our collections panel. Here is our collection called Postman, an introduction for developers. And the collection contains a bunch of requests organized into folders. And we'll be going through this today in our demo. So that's for this navigation bar. In the center, we have our content menu. So for example, if I were to open up one of these folders like sending requests and click on the first request called Get Books, I can see we kind of have two worlds on the screen. The top world is request world and the bottom world is response world. So anything that has to do with making a request to an API will configure up here and you can see all of the components that make up a request in a HTTP request.
So Claire, can I ask us to,
yeah.
Can I just ask us to back up just briefly? I want to go back to the Postman Space Camp just workspace overview, and just kind of talk about folks being able to find information in there just before we dive into the the sending and getting responses. So
sure.
If you don't mind, clicking the Postman Space Camp next to the globe on the top left.
Up here?
Yeah. So just to quickly point out, this is kind of the home base and landing page for this public workspace. And what's really nice about public workspaces, like Claire said, this is going to be that area where all things kind of similarly themed will live. In this case, this is our overview page that gives us a bit of information about Postman Space Camp. So again, if you're new to this, which everyone here is because this is our very first session, it's worth just taking a quick look at all the things that are in here. And so if you're finding this, after the fact and just joining at, a random point in the video, this is a good place to come and see what lives inside of a public workspace. There's plenty of information about how to get started, subscribing for future sessions. And if you scroll down a little bit more, Claire, you can see right here. So who is Spaceman or who is Space Camp for? Scroll up a tiny bit. A little bit more. Yeah, perfect. Yep. And so it talks about right now, there's only this one collection, which Claire talked about, this Postman, an introduction for developers. And that's the one we're going to walk through today. And as this program gets more fleshed out and we have more webinars, this area will become more robust and have more collections available for folks to go through. So just wanted to point out that this is a good place for folks to go and learn about, what's in the what's in the workspace rather.
Yeah, great intro, Sean. And this is a good point to point out. When you land on a public workspace, you can see all of these things. But if you want to actually tinker around and play with the requests, you're going to have to create a fork of your own copy of the collection. So I'm going to go ahead and walk you through on how you'll create your own workspace in order to fork your collection there. So you can make a workspace by clicking on workspaces up in the upper left and new workspace. And it's going to give us a couple of options on what type of workspace we want to make. For example, if I made a team workspace, anybody registered with my team, well, I work at Postman, anybody in the company could see that workspace. That's great if you're trying to build an API with another, within a team or, share with your company. I'm just going to be doing the demo with myself today. So I'll make this a personal website workspace. But you can also make a public one if you wanted to share it with the wider world. So I'm just going to call my workspace Space Camp Demo and go ahead and click Create Workspace. So this is going to take me to this new workspace and it's nice and empty. It's ready for starting some work. So in order to grab that Space Camp collection, I'm going to go and search again for Postman Space Camp in the search bar. And let's see if it comes up here. Right there is the Postman Space Camp workspace. We'll navigate back there.
So for those that are,
what I want is, go ahead, Sean.
Sorry, no, I was just saying, so for those of you that are, familiar with, Git or GitHub workflow, what Claire is doing is very similar to that. The idea of, pulling a repository so you can work on it locally. That's what we're doing, basically, just creating this copy of the collection so that people can't, actually change anything in the public workspace, but you're creating a copy in your own local area.
Exactly. Fork is just a fancy word for copy. So I'm going to go ahead and create a fork of the collection so that we can play with it. It's going to give me the option to name it. I'll just call it Claire's fork. Claire fork. And then I get to choose where it goes. So I'm going to select the workspace that I just created called the Postman or Space Camp Demo workspace. But you can fork yours anywhere you'd like. So it's going to navigate us to our custom workspace. And now I have the whole collection completely copied. So now is a good time to dive into the UI of the request and response world again. We're going to be playing with an API today called the Library API. It's basically just a CRUD API for creating, reading, updating, and deleting books in a library. If you'd like to see the documentation for this API, you can go ahead and click on the collection. And on the far right of Postman, you have these little icons. One of them at the top is for documentation, the little file icon. And here you can find a markdown documentation of a description of this collection. And it covers a lot of the things that Sean already mentioned, but one of the links is to the API documentation. So if I were to open this in a new tab, the API and for this API is actually in. So in the same tool, we can show you how you can use Postman to document your APIs. But here's the library API. You can see it has these 5 request types. Clicking on any request type will show you documentation for what you can request. And actually, we can view the documentation for all of these requests at once by clicking ... and view documentation. So these are the endpoints that we're going to be playing around with today. For those of you familiar with REST CRUD APIs, you probably know the conventions, but feel free to check this out. All right, so let's head back to the Spacecamp demo workspace and let's try to send our first request. From the library API, checking the documentation, you'll see hitting the books endpoint with a GET request will return all of our books. So for Postman, we can put our request URL here and define our request method over at the left from this dropdown. And you'll see it has all of your classic request methods. Some you may have never used in your life, but you can always go ahead and use them.
I haven't used a lot of those, Claire.
If you've used Purge, let me know in the chat. I'm really curious what that one does. But we're going to make a basic GET request. You'll also notice there's a lot of other configuration we can do on the request, but we'll touch on that in a moment. For now,
cool. Claire, can I add one thing on this API?
Yeah, go
cool.
ahead.
So one thing that's cool about this API that Claire created, this Postman library API, is it does operate as a full API. So it has full CRUD operation. So if you wanted to play with this, fork the Postman collection that we're working on into your own workspace, and you can add books, and we'll be able to see those as you do it. So definitely fork the collection, and that way you can interact, and we'll see your books that you added as we go through this. So just want to recommend that. So
sure, yeah. If you're a go-getter, go for it. All right, so we have our method and our URL. I'm going to go ahead and send this request. So going out to the server and making a GET request, and then you see in the bottom half of the screen is response world. So this is the JSON response that came back from a request. You can see that it's JSON because it's labeled here as JSON. We're looking at the body tab, so we can see the request body here, or excuse me, the response body. And we see a list of books that came back, an array of books. So this is really nice because those of you that are developers used to using curl in your terminal, you might just get this huge blob of JSON that's not formatted and styled, and it's kind of hard to see. Postman makes it nice and pretty. And because you can make requests in different tabs, you can always switch back and forth, and it helps you organize yourself. So we see some books here, like one called Ficciones by Borges. It's not checked out. It also has an ID. I'm going to go ahead and grab this ID because we'll use it in our next request. All right, so I've copied the ID. I'm going to look at how to get a single book. So many APIs will have, I'm going to zoom in just a little so you can see this better. Many APIs have, query parameters or path parameters. In this case, this API takes a path parameter of a book ID from the books endpoint when we're trying to get a single book. And what's cool about Postman is, you could hard paste your book ID in like this and click send, and it should return the Ficciones book. Yeah. Or to make it more readable to yourself and other developers, you can use that wildcard : path variable. And I've named it ID. You can see Postman popped up a little path variable helper down here. So this is another way that I can apply the path variable. Now, if I do the same thing and click send, it works just like before. The only difference is it's much easier to read as a developer, and you can imagine if this was documentation, yes, I need to put the book ID here. It makes a lot of sense. All right, so far we've been playing around with GET requests. What if we want to make a POST request? Let's try that by adding a book to our library. So the endpoint is going to be the same, /books. The only difference is we've now selected POST as our verb. Now, with a POST request, we need to include a body. So I'm going to head over here. We have a sample body already in place. So to add a book, I just need to send a raw JSON body that has a title, author, genre, and a published year published. And you'll note here, there's actually many different types of bodies you can send in Postman. Right now, we're sending a JSON body, but you could easily send, form data. You can even send files like a binary. You can make GraphQL bodies by typing a query or a mutation in here. You can even use GraphQL variables. So no matter what type of API you're interacting with, you'll be able to send the type of body data that you would like. For now, I'm just going to go with the default body here. Yeah.
One thing I just want to add, Claire, like this is kind of one of the benefits of Postman, and you'll kind of see this theme throughout, where all these things that could be quite challenging to send the proper request via curl or whatever else you want to send it through. Postman handles all of this as you change it from, this is a JSON body, and so all these requests are handled so that the API receiving the request knows exactly what's coming through, and it's just like a very convenient thing that Postman handles. And we'll see that kind of throughout as we go through more and more stuff.
Yes, it's a no fuss API solution. So we have the default body here. I'm going to go ahead and send this request off to our endpoint as a post request. And you'll see that we get a status 201 created. The cool thing about Postman is you don't have to memorize status codes. You can always hover down here and see exactly what a 201 is, what a 504 is. You'll never have to guess. So this worked successfully. We've created a new book. And now let's check and see if our book actually was reflected in the API. We already have our books request up here as a tab. So I can just navigate back there and send this request again. So no more recopying and pasting into the terminal with curl. Just one click of the button. I can see not only I, but many of you have added our sample book. So that's a success story. I'm glad you guys were able to do that. So that's great. What if we want to, say, update this data? I want to check out one of these books. So I'm going to take the most recent 100 Years of Solitude ID.
I wonder how far down this one's going to be, Claire, when we go to update it.
Well, it won't matter because we can search
so it'll be pulled to the top.
book.
Cool.
So, yeah, I want to change checked out from false to true because I'm gonna check this book out. So let's try a patch request. It's going to be similar to our, getting a single books endpoint. We have our path variable here again. This time for the ID, I'll paste in the 100 Years of Solitude, most recent one, and I'll go ahead and save my request, and I'll send this off after I update the body, right? So with a patch request, you can also include a body. I want to change checked out to true. So if I send this request, I get a status 200. The operation was successful. So if I want to double check and make sure that now this book has a checked out true, I can head back to our book request. And now all I have to do is replace this ID from our previous request with our new ID. And if I send this off, I should expect checked out true to come back for the 100 Years of Solitude. And it does. So
nice.
Our requests are real, they're working. Lastly, I'm going to go ahead and delete that book. And I hope this is the one that I created. So sorry if I'm deleting one of your books, but same endpoint. We'll use the delete verb this time. And of course, include our book ID in the path variable. Save, send. And somebody beat me to it. It looks like somebody's racing through here, but that's a good sign. This is a 404 not found that was returned because I guess somebody deleted the book before I did. But if it was a success, it would have come back as a 200. Great. So that's just an overview of like your basic CRUD operations that you'd be doing, day to day with a REST API. You're probably all familiar with that. Some other cool things that Postman lets you do that you can't exactly do in curl automatically is add tests to your request. So for example, let's take a book that exists. I'll scroll to the very bottom.
Can I jump in here for a sec?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I just want to do a quick recap, and so folks are just joining us now. Just kind of want to talk quickly about what we covered, and just remind people. So this session is being recorded. If you want to access it later, or you're watching it live in the future. What we've covered so far is just this first kind of getting used to the Postman UI, sending requests using various GET requests or various HTTP verbs, and just kind of seeing how to go about the basics of Postman. And yeah, so if you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A section. You'll notice some of them have already been answered. We have panelists here to answer any of those questions that come through. But yeah, just wanted to give that quick recap. We're going to move on to kind of a little bit more of a deep dive into some of the cool stuff for Postman, especially for developers. That's kind of that first intro where, if you're new to Postman, I think it's kind of important to get your feet wet and just see the basics of sending various API requests. So that's what we've covered so far. And now Claire's going to take us through this next stuff where, testing is a huge part of development, and we're going to see how you can use Postman to kind of go about that. And actually, Claire, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the folder level description before we look at the request itself.
Yeah, over here.
So yeah, thanks. So this is going to be an area, for those of you that are stumbling across this collection organically, or just interested in learning a bit more. Each of these folders themselves, if you look at the documentation tab, we'll have a bit more information about what the learning objective is for this folder, why it exists, and almost all of them, I believe, will have a link to documentation. So if you're stuck on something or just want to continue your learning, there's valuable resources in the descriptions of each folder. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on that. We want to dive into kind of the fun stuff of sending requests and seeing what's in there, but just wanted to point that out for folks watching.
Yeah, I can tell some of you are reading the documentation and working ahead, so you've already found documentation. Good for you. Yeah, so far we've kind of explored, poking at APIs. Like, say that you're a developer and you're wanting to integrate an API into one of your applications. What we've done so far is great for figuring out what types of data to expect. But what if you're building an API and you want to test that the response coming back is what you're expecting is coming back? That's where tests in Postman come into play. And if we take a look at a request, you'll see all requests have a test tab. So if I click on this, you'll see it opens up a window that allows us to type node code. And Postman comes with a couple of helpers for writing tests using this PM object. You should know that under the hood, Postman is using Chai test library. So if you're familiar with that, you already know how to write tests in Postman. If you aren't familiar with that, you just look up the Chai documentation and you know how to write tests in Postman. But I find I never have to look at the documentation because over here on the right, there are snippets. So for example, this first test that's in the tab here came from a snippet. Status code is 200 is a very common thing to test for. I can actually delete this and put it back in. So if I click on the right at the test tab, status code is 200, it's going to just paste right in that test. And I can click through here and do all sorts of different tests. But let's try this one first. The way this works is when you send a request in Postman, the whole script in the test tab is run once the response comes back. So if we were to put an ID in here from our books, let's go grab one of these bottom IDs, like this API book. I'll take that ID, come back to our request, put the ID in the path parameter and save it. So this is going to, make a GET request just like we've done before. We get the response back. The difference is now we're getting test results back as well. And that's because after our response came back, it ran our test script. And you can see all of our tests pass. Status code is 200. But we can always add more than one test. So for example, I know Sean's a big fan of the contains a string test. So if I click on that snippet, Postman is going to paste in a test for making sure that our response has some sort of string inside. And for example, in this response, we're expecting the word RESTful to appear in the title, right? So it's given as a boiler test. It's letting me replace, we're expecting our response text to include the string RESTful in it somewhere. So now if I send this request again.
Yeah, I really like this because it helps just make sure that what you're sending, that it exists somewhere in the response body. So it's this is a pretty basic test, but these snippets kind of allow you to expand on them. But yeah, so this one does bring back, right now we see you have 2 test results, and the 2 of 2 means that 2 tests are passing. So just really, helpful to see like, okay, does the body somewhere include this string RESTful? And we see that it does. And one other quick thing to point out here is the name of the test is kind of that first parameter in each of these. So if you change that to say, body contains RESTful string or something like that, that would, these are just kind of boilerplate names for everything. And so that's just another customizable thing. So your test can be a little bit more descriptive.
Great point. Yeah. The boiler is handy, but it becomes useless if you don't edit it to your to your needs.
So I think, go ahead, Claire. I was just going to say, like, there's a lot more you can do with testing. I would say feel free to explore the snippets, but I think let's go on and try to get to the next thing here.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and open saving response examples. This is another feature that's great about Postman because we can make our requests just like before. And let's say I don't want to keep making a real API request when say as a developer, I'm trying to map this data into my application. I just need to know the shape of this data, and I just want to save what this looks like. So all I have to do is on any response, you can say save response, and you can say save as example or save it to a file on your computer. I'm going to say save as example, and you'll see Postman puts an example right inside the request. So now I can go click around, anywhere else, but I can come back, and without making an actual API request, all I do is click on the example, and the response is saved here. It even saves the status code and all of the headers that came back from the response. So it's a way to take a snapshot of your response. And there's other cool things you can do with examples. I'm going to go ahead and make an example for all of the requests that we just
So Claire, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
If we go back to that initial request, that initial books request that we just did, and let's mess it up. And let's say for our request, instead of books, we have make the URL books. Books.
Like this?
Something that's just not correct, right? And let's click send. Right, we'll get some sort of error.
So we get,
Yeah, and it's just, if you wanted to save this as an example as well, so you could save this just like as an example that's incorrect. And one other thing that's kind of nice is the ability, right, to rename these. This could be like 404. You can name it 404 bad request, not found. So this is just kind of a nice way to, give people a kind of a blueprint and an idea of what's happening in your collections. And again, Claire, I think ideally we'd go through and make an example for all these. I think the other stuff is more important. I want to make sure we leave some time for Q&A at the end, but yeah, what Claire is going through here, you could do this for all of them. And it's a nice way to, like we said, just show people what the examples or what the API could behave like, even if they don't have access to it. So if you have a public workspace, great idea there.
Yeah, thank you for calling that out. And this is great too if you're handing off your documentation to somebody and they need to know how to use your API. They don't have to make any sample requests. They can always just check the examples and they know how to do it. All right, so like Sean said, we don't need to make an example for all of these, but I will say the cool thing about making examples is then you can just click one extra button and you make a mock server out of your whole API. So this is great for backend and front-end developers because the front-end people don't have to wait for the backend people to actually build the server. They have the data to play with. The backend people can write tests before they actually code based on the mock server, and it just really helps you divide and conquer on your teams. Okay, moving along, another important thing we can do in Postman is get and set variables. So for example, here's our get books, and we get a list of all these books. Let's say we don't always know which book we're going to use in a request. If we want to get a specific book, we can use Postman's variable notation, which is this double curly braces. And you'll see it's here in two places. If I hover on it now, it's saying base URL is an unresolved variable. And that means this is a variable, but it has no value. How can we give this variable a value? Well, there's many places you can save a variable. We have what's called environments. You can share across multiple collections, or we can save a variable on a collection itself. I'm going to go ahead and do that for the base URL. So to save a collection variable, you can click on your collection, head to the variables tab, and you get this little chart that lets you name a variable, base URL. And I don't remember the URL, so I'm going to copy it from here, head back to our collection, and I'll put that here in initial value. And Postman persists this value for base URL. Now, if I save this, which is important, and I head back to our get book from ID request, now you'll see base URL is orange, and I hover over it, the value that we just pasted in our collection variable resolves here. That's great, but we still don't have an ID. How can we save a book ID? We can do it programmatically as well. So what we've done now is manually set the variable. Let's try it programmatically using our test script. So we know that we can use test snippets from the Chai library to write tests, but you can do more than just testing in the test tab. We can programmatically set our variable and do console logging. So for example, if I were to run this request, right now we're logging the string JSON response equals pm.response.json. So this is going to be our response object from the GET request. If I click send, and it's been logged to our console, which we can access from the lower left. And if I scroll to the very bottom, you'll see we have our JSON response. This is what we see in the response body. It's just now logged. So what do I want to do? I want to save the ID of this book to our collection variable programmatically, so I don't have to manually copy paste. And to do that, I can use the Postman's PM helper. So PM, and then if I say dot, it gives me a list of all of these built-in methods I can use. Collection variables is the one I want. And this collection variables has two important methods, a getter and a setter. If I want to set a collection variable, I just use the set method. And it takes two arguments. The first one is the name. So I'm going to say the variable is called ID, and then the value. So what do we want as our value? We want the first book in our response. I could go ahead up here and we'll just say books, make a variable called books, and I can get the response data just like above from pm.response.json. And that's going to be this value. It's in our log, an array of books. I just want the first book ID to be saved to our collection variable. So if I send this again, it's going to fire our script. And yeah, we get a response just like normal. But now if I checked our collection variables, I can see programmatically we've added a book ID from that first book. And now this is accessible everywhere in our collection. So if I went back to our request that had ID as a variable in the URL, I hover there, I can see it's the now programmatically assigned book ID, which is great for making workflows. You can have these dynamic requests, and you can imagine how this is going to speed up your API consumption and testing. All right. I know we're running short on time. I'm going to speed through and make sure we cover one of my favorite features of Postman, which is the auth helpers. So far, we've been playing around with an API that does not require auth. But as many of you know, anything that's cool with APIs on the internet requires auth usually. And Postman takes the pain out of that process. You'll notice on every single request, there is an authorization tab. If we click that, I'll make some real estate down here. You'll see there's a dropdown for different types of auth. You've got your OAuth 2, basic auth, bearer token for access tokens, API keys. These other ones I haven't even heard of. you got all these options. Let's go ahead and try to hit the GitHub API. And we can just use some basic auth for that. Now, you'll see the first option here is called inherit auth from parent. So yes, you can put auth on a single request, or you can put auth on a folder or collection. So that say you're making different requests to the same API, you don't have to keep, repasting in your API keys over and over. It's just one auth and you're done. Let's go ahead and do auth on this folder called Basic Authorization, because we have 2 requests to GitHub. Same thing, there's an authorization tab here. I want to do basic auth, and it's going to ask for my GitHub username and password. And here the password is a personal access token. So my GitHub is ClareFro, and my personal access token is right over here. Now I could paste this in here, hard-coded, and save. And then now this auth lives on our folder. So I can go inside to a request that's hitting the GitHub API, make sure that the type is inheriting auth from parent so that we're getting it from our folder, and click send. And you'll see I'm actually getting data back from GitHub. I mean, I could turn off auth and say no auth and try again. And you'll see I'm getting a status 401 requires auth. So now it's super easy. All I do is select inherit from parent, send. I'm authorized to make this request. I can do the same for getting all of my repos at another endpoint without changing anything, because by default, request inherit auth from the parent. And
Claire,
this is great. Yeah.
Can I just say that I'm very impressed with the lack of leaking of a personal token? always a challenge on live stream. So yeah, very, very nice. And yeah, this is awesome. I love using the folder level information, right? So saving this auth at the folder level is just super helpful. And if we wanted to, we could save it. We could also do authorization at the collection level, which we saw for like our environment, for our collection level variables. But this is just a nice way to, kind of don't repeat yourself, right? It's a common acronym that developers try to follow of not having to write the same code over and over. There's no point in entering in auth credentials for 20 requests if you're going to use them, when we can just put it at this folder level like Claire's done here.
Exactly. And developers especially don't want to repeat themselves when they're dealing with OAuth. I know all of you have had painful experience doing the OAuth dance. I'll just point out Postman makes it super easy to do OAuth dance. You just fill out all of these fields, or all the required ones. If you don't know what they are, you can always hover on the tooltip. It will tell you. And it does the whole dance for you. So if you want to play around with APIs that use OAuth, this is super, super helpful. One other quick note here is when you're dealing with auth, usually you're dealing with sensitive data. And I hard-coded the password in here, but you can also click show password here. And just like we had before, you can use variables in here. So let's say like I had a variable called access token. Oops. Remember the syntax for variables in Postman is these double curly braces. Now I could define a variable either in my environment or my collection, and it would keep, I wouldn't have to hard code my secrets anywhere. So just that's a note there. All right, last and not least, we're just gonna cover a couple of the things you can do to help debug. We're going back to our books API. If I make this request, it's just like we expected before, we get back our books. Up until now, we've been playing with scripts in the test tab. So the life cycle of running requests in Postman is before you hit send, it's going to run scripts in the pre-request script tab. We have a couple scripts in here. Then you hit send, it goes out and gets the response. Then it runs the test scripts. So this is like the pre-flight scripts that go on in here. Just like any node environment, you can have these console warn, log, info, error. And if you check the console, you can see this pretty rainbow of errors down here. My screen is tweaking a bit on live stream right now. but you can see like log or warn comes with warning labels, info labels, and danger labels down here. So you're probably familiar with that. Again, when you're writing tests, it helps to log things so you know exactly what's happening. You can also see a history of all of the requests that you've made and what request and response headers came back and bodies. Likewise, you can always see a whole history of all the requests you've made in your session from the history tab on the left. So those are a couple of things to help debug.
And Claire, can I add one more thing here that I think is a pretty helpful tool for developers?
Please do.
Sure. So another thing that Postman is really great at, and I think kind of a bit of an unknown feature, is the code generation feature. So if Claire looks over there on that right tab, the little code symbol, the bracket, will generate the code for these requests automatically in a bunch of different languages or frameworks. So if you click that drop down, you can see all these various things, and curl is a big one. That's kind of like the original way to look. So it just if there was authorization like we talked about from a previous request, all of that information will be in there. So yeah, this is great, Claire. So check out one of these requests, and we look at the code snippet for this request. Out there now I've made you leak your token.
Yeah, it's base 64 encoded, so have fun.
Okay,
guys.
Perfect. But yeah, right. So this code generation is another way you can kind of, I don't know if it'll help debug, but if you want to play around with these requests in a different environment or with a different language, this is another way you can do that.
Yeah, and if you're a curl fan, it could just help you write your curl statements if you'd like to do it in a graphical way. So now it's paste it and you get the same information back. Yep.
Cool.
Great. So
I think, yeah,
why don't you pointing out that feature, Sean, and sorry to keep talking over you.
No worries. But yeah, I think that's all for the intro. Yeah, I agree. Claire, why don't you, if you don't mind, stop sharing, and we'll have a quick chat before we head into the last segment here.
All right.
Awesome. Yeah. So Claire, thanks so much for that walkthrough. I hope that was valuable for folks. We're going to jump in a second to kind of a recap and the Q&A section. But yeah, I think that was super valuable and helpful. And I mean, I always learn something from these. So yeah, we've got about 10 minutes left. So I'm gonna share my screen again and pull up just some of the last things here. So before we kind of go through I'll do this. The Q&A section, just a quick recap. These are the same things that were listed as our learning objectives, right? And these kind of follow along with the various folder names. So hopefully you learned all these. If not, there's more documentation and resources available for learning. And speaking of learning resources, here are a few public workspaces that you can go to and have quite a bit of information on just Postman, popular questions. So these are all public. Hopefully somebody can add these links in the chat. But same idea where you can fork these collections into your own workspace. Postman Answers is a public workspace that has the most common questions that were asked on our community forum. And a lot of these are kind of, I have an array of JSON objects. How do I, loop through and get stuff? Things that are kind of common developer questions are pretty popular. If you're a developer and new to Postman, this is a fantastic resource. This 30 Days of Postman for Developers. This is an opportunity to go through 30 individual lessons that cover some of the stuff that we covered here, but even more. It talks about the various things that you can use Postman for. And then, of course, Postman Space Camp, which hopefully most of you have gotten to at this point. And so with that, let's jump into the Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing my screen again. So you see both Claire and I's faces here. And Claire, I've got a few questions that I saw come through. So we'll just kind of pick a few in the last few minutes that we have here. So one of the questions I saw was, what is the pre-request script? And that is one you kind of touched on. And again, it's that idea of the code or things that are handled before the actual request is sent out. So if you're setting environment or setting collection level variables and you want it done before the request is sent, that's what's going to happen in that pre-request script. Let's see. Would it be possible? So here we go. Would it be possible to use an external webhook with Postman? Basically, how to use webhooks with Postman. And so for that one,
it is possible now.
Yeah, exactly. You want to expand on it, Claire?
Yeah, actually, very recently, I think like a month ago, Postman now allows webhook in our requests. And I think let me open up my screen again. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
I haven't actually used the webhook feature yet, but I believe, can you make a new WebSocket request? Yeah, so it's in beta right now, but if you click on the new up in your workspace, it's going to allow you to make a special collection that's for WebSockets. And here it guides you through it. You'll put your URL in here, your WS // and you can see the whole feed down here live. So yes, you can WebSockets.
I think one other thing worth mentioning, Claire, would be the Postman API. That's another way to go about using WebSockets. So if you were to go in the search bar and search for just Postman API, right? This should pull up. Yep, you can.
Which one? This one?
Let's do. Yeah, they're both from the Postman team. So yeah, we can pull that. Actually, let's do the collection one. That's fine. This will bring us to the right spot. No, this is fine.
We're in the right workspace.
Yep, exactly. And so go to collections and unfurl the Postman API. Yep. And so from here, you can see we have the webhooks folder underneath the Postman API. And so this is just another way to kind of go about creating webhooks, and the folder is documented pretty well. And so if you wanted to use this is one way to use that feature. And actually, yeah, so Claire, I think we were talking about different things. You were talking about WebSockets. And so this is webhooks. So they're not the same, but both are interesting, fun parts of the functionality that's available within Postman.
Well, now you know two things.
Exactly. All right, let's see. We might have another time for another one or two more questions. So, okay, another question that comes up often, and I think is important to know, is basically the difference between initial value and current value. And
Excellent
so this
question.
is something, yeah. So
I'm not on my workspace, but I'll just show you. Actually, let's go back to our workspace, the Postman Space Camp demo. So yeah, this is a common question. Any place that you can save variables, you'll see there's two columns. Let's see, we didn't get in set. Here in our collection variables, make some space. You'll see there's an initial value and a current value column. And initial value is like the persisted value of the variable. If you were to share this collection with a friend or a coworker, that value would carry over to the fork or the copy, whatever you're sharing. That's great for, things that you want to share, but sometimes you have sensitive data that you don't want to share, or data that's specific to your environment specifically. In that case, you want to put it in the current value column only. And the benefit is this will work on your local machine and it will evaluate to this value on the right, but it won't be copied or shared if you fork this collection. So you could put API keys here. You could put your email here if it's like specific to your account. That's the difference. And great question, very common.
Cool. Yeah, that is a common one.
You can always hover on the tooltip, by the way, if you don't remember which is which.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, Claire, do you mind stopping sharing? I think that's all the time we have for questions. So we do have, like we said earlier on, a few more quick things to mention. So I'm going to take back over here and share my screen. So yeah, this just about concludes our session here, but I do want to point out that we do have upcoming Space Camp sessions, and these are going to be, we're going to try to do them bi-monthly. So hopefully twice a month we'll have new sessions, and this is something we're super excited about. We've got quite a lineup coming up. So this next one is August 3rd at the same time, 8 a.m. Pacific time. And this one is going to be Postman, an introduction for API ops professionals. And so this is going to be, today's session was kind of targeted for developers. This is going to be API ops professionals. And so it's going to be an awesome session led by another one of our developer advocates, Mina, and Vu will be joining her. So again, that's August 3rd. And I think in the chat, somebody can pass along information for registering for this webinar and signing up to subscribe for more information on Space Camp sessions. The next one coming up after that is August 18th. And this is going to be designing and prototyping an API. This is going to be led by Arlemy. And so this will kind of talk about, building APIs, speeding up API development, and increasing your API adoption. So 2 really nice sessions coming up, and we've got plenty more on the docket, but those are just the next 2 that are officially scheduled and announced. Again, in the chat, feel free to find the information for those there. And then, so the last thing, this is a very new program for us. We want to hear about your experience. So we have a survey. It's very short. It should take about a minute to fill out. And it'll really help us kind of guide the future sessions. So you can tell us what went well, what you liked, things you'd like to see a little bit more of, what kind of background information would have helped going in, and just various things that will help us make this better for you. So it's really valuable. We read all the answers, and so we really appreciate you can take a minute to do that. Again, hopefully that link will get into the chat. And lastly, thank you. Really appreciate everyone showing up today. I know I had a great time. So from all of us at Postman, thank you very much. Claire, any last words?
I was just going to double what you're saying. Yeah, thank you everyone for your time. Check the river of links in the chat right now. There's a lot of valuable stuff there, especially the survey. We'd love to hear from you. And yeah, happy hacking, happy API request and responsing.
Cool. All right. I think that's all. Thanks, everyone. See you at the next session.